everybody, and welcome to the Bombus Affinus or Not quiz, which is, as you may guess, focused on just mainly the ID skills for picking Affinus apart from other things. And so I'm Elaine at University of Minnesota Extension and in the Caribou Bee Lab, and joining me.
I'm Chan. I'm a master's student in the Caribou Native Bee Lab. A lot of my research focuses on bumblebees and bumblebee nesting, so I have quite a bit of experience with ID. So happy to be joining Elaine.
All right. We're going to start out with just a quick review on some Rusty Patch Bumblebee ID stuff. So for Rusty Patch Bumble ID, looking at that second segment of the abdomen, that's where we see the rusty patch. So T1, the first segment is all yellow. On that second abdominal segment, we'll see the rusty patch. On that top part of that segment, bordered by yellow along the bottom and along the sides. And then on the thorax, we're looking for this thumbtack shape. So a kind of a T-shaped area of black hairs between the wings, and also stretching back towards the thorax. So those are the kind of the two main features that we're looking at for worker ID. We do have a separate thing for queen ID, but we don't want to forget about the queens because it is different. But this queens and workers and males both are covered by those features. So the rusty patch and the thumbtack. We do have some more information on Rusty Patch Bumblebee ID on the Bee Lab website. So beelab.umn.edu/Rusty Patch Identification if you want to review any of those things anytime. And there are a few bees that are most commonly confused with Rusty Patch. So they include the tricolored bumblebee, the brown belted bumblebee, the half black, and the red belted. And we do cover all this in more detail on the session that we have that covers Rusty Patch identification, but this is just a reminder. And then we're just going to do a little quiz here and talk you through some of these photos. So we can do the back and forth again.
Yeah,
I'll start with this one. So here we've got a bee, and the main goal here is Rusty Patch or not. But we're also, for funsies, we can also talk about what these bees are. So for this one, so looking for that thumbtack, looking for the Rusty Patch on T2. This is not a Rusty Patch. So it does have a bit of what might look like a thumbtack here, but this is mostly looking like you're seeing kind of cuticle shining through. So this isn't a lot of black hairs that are there. And then on T2, we're not seeing this rusty patch in the middle. We're not seeing yellow on the bottom part of that T2. We can really clearly see where the segments start and end because this bee is a little bit bald here. But this is Bombus bimaculatus female. So she's got kind of spots of yellow hair in the middle of T2. We can see it's a female from those nice big pollen baskets.
Yes, our next bee here visiting prairie purple. What is it? Prairie purple clover?
Purple prairie
purple prairie clover. That was close. That was close. Yeah. So yeah, looking again, we're looking for a coloration of the rusty patch on the abdomen here. And we can see this bee does have some brown coloration on its abdomen, which would maybe key us into rusty patch. But this bee is a Grizzlyoculus female. We know it's a female by the pollen baskets. And if we just go back here, you can see this brown on the abdomen. It's not bordered by yellow on the second tergite where the rusty patch would be. It's more of the semicircle or the swoop of brown connecting kind of like at the top of the second tergite all the way to the edge. So that's the big thing for me is, it's lacking that yellow color that like borders the rusty patch color.
Just a shout out to watching bees on purple prairie clover. They have that amazing bright orange pollen. It's really fun to see.
Yeah,
bees
and they love to
there.
like swirl up the flower too, because it's that cone shape. Good plant.
All right, this is our next bee. And from the side, it's harder to tell if you are looking for that tack shape on the thorax, but you can still look to see if you see hairs closer to the wing base that are black. And this one you can get a nice side view of what's going on T2. So this one is an Aphanus, a rusty patch. And so we do see the rusty patch, and we do see yellow hairs on the other side of it. This is a nice, big, broad, pretty darkly colored patch, which they do vary quite a bit. And this one, for male versus female, we can see the thin hind leg here, and a bunch of fuzz up on top of the head. Really, really cute boy.
Yeah, this is a really great photo. I like that photo. So our next bee here. Just give us a couple seconds to take a look at it. Again, we're looking for like, the thumbtack coloration on the thorax. Any yellow hair that might be on the head that might signify a male. Looking at the abdomen. So this bee is not an Aphanus. This is a Vagans female, the half black female. And sometimes these bees can be tricky because they have the T1 and T2 with yellow. And if you look closely, you can kind of see like a little bit of a shadow sometimes on the Vagans. That could, like in the wrong lighting, really, really look like a brown color or just like some reminiscent of some rusty patch shape. But it is in fact just fully yellow there, and you can tell because it's like more of like a black or a gray tone than it is like a rusty tone. Like if you see the rusty patch, like you're gonna know like that it's pretty brown, right? And I would say even with the thorax too, it's more of like a band than it is of like a extending down here, for the thumbtack shape. And then you can see like there's not as much black hair going on here. You can see it's like a little divoted down. You can see like some of the cuticle. And then just another like minor thing when it comes to looking at rusty patch versus like Vagans is look at how long the face is on the head here. Like rusty patch bumblebees tend to have a really short like face, whereas the Vagans kind of have like a little bit of a long face, kind of like a horse. So that's like a very subtle thing. If you get a nice like side look, you can maybe look at in conjunction with the thumbtack and rusty patch swoop. So yeah, Vagans female.
Our next bee is here on Monarda. And so again, looking at the thorax, looking at what's happening in those first couple segments of the abdomen. This is an Aphanus. Looks like an Aphanus worker, and can clearly see the black thumbtack shape here, T2 with another nice big clear band of the rusty colored hairs bordered by yellow on the far side.
Also, they can just be really round sometimes, I feel like, compared to something like a bimaculatus can be kind of long. I sometimes think like Aphanus look a little more round than your average bumblebee. And here's our next bee on what looks like a thistle to me. Really striking colors on this one. However, this would not be an Aphanus, mainly because we're looking, it's really easy to like, oops, let's go back. It's really easy to look at like a really striking bee like this in the field, and your brain, starts leaning towards rusty patch because you're seeing these red tones. But definitely notice how the red tones are past the second tergite, right? So there's yellow on the first one, kind of getting some yellow and red on the second one, but that red is kind of more on the border on the outside. And then you have like 2 or 3 more tergites of red, which would make this a red belted bumblebee. So yeah, we're only looking for those like red and brown tones to be on the second tergite in the rusty patch swoop. Also just like kind of longer hairs coming out from the thorax here, which is a little more like anecdotal maybe, but generally I feel like rusty patch have a little bit shorter, more cleaner looking hairs than they are shaggy. And that black band is quite like more of a band than it is like having any black hairs coming down to form like the tack of the thumbtack.
All right, so our next bee here looks like she's on some Joe Pye weed.
Rusty patch favorite, I think. They really like it.
And this one so we're looking at the thorax. We have a good view of what's going on the tergites. But this one, you also need to pay attention to kind of when you're seeing these bees and how big they are. So this one is actually an Aphanus queen. And so the queens do not have the thumbtack. They don't have the rusty patch. We have a whole different segment talking about what to look for with them. They are still distinctive. They're just very different than the workers and males. Looking for on the thorax this kind of velvety, not too shaggy, but not too short, but just a little bit of black hair in the center. And then the entirety of T1 and 2 are all yellow. And that combined with their size, they're fairly large bees, even for among the queens, they're pretty large queens. They also have these short round faces. So the coloration overlaps more with vagans, which also have the 2 yellow stripes on the abdomen, but they'll be much shaggier, they'll be smaller, and their faces will be longer.
So our next bee here, just give a couple seconds. So this is not an Aphanus. This is a Tenarius, a tricolored bumblebee. And first things for me would be just looking at, that abdomen has more yellow than just on T1 and T2. It's getting on to T3 and 4. So already that's going to rule out rusty patch for me. However, the thorax definitely looking pretty thumbtack shape, which is characteristic of the tricolored bumblebee. But just like, I think one thing to note is just like that is a really major thick thumbtack compared to kind of what rusty patch is. It's just a little more smaller. And then in combination with the tergite color combination, we can rule out rusty patch and lean towards Tenarius here.
Yeah, and Tenarius tend to be more common up in the northern areas in the Midwest. So here in Minnesota, they're actually one of the most common, if not the most common bumblebee. And yeah, people who know, the thumbtack and the orange, and they get really excited, and they're all over the place. But the things to remember with Aphanus is that their characteristics are they're clear and they're distinctive, but they are a little more subtle. So their thumbtack is there, but it's not as blatantly obvious as this thumbtack. Yeah, same with their rusty colors that they have. Their rusty patch can be pretty obscure, and Turnarius is like chunks of color. So it's like a chunk of yellow, 2 distinct chunks of orange.
Yeah. And one thing just to note with this bee is the orange. So it's typically like yellow on the first tergite and then orange, yellow. But this one, those colors all look really similar to each other, which happens like sometimes, as they like age or just like how they're born, because there is variation. So sometimes that orange can be a lot more striking, which might throw you off.
All right, our next bee here. So we've purposefully included some blurry photos because they do happen. It's hard to take pictures, clear pictures of things that are flying around quickly. And to make the point too that as long as you can see what you need to see, it doesn't need to be some, National Geographic cover photo to be able to ID bumblebees. And this is a nice photo. We can see what we need to see here on this bee, and this we can see enough that this is not a rusty patch bumblebee. So this one does have that really bright orange. You can see the distinct yellow, orange, yellow, the really thick thumbtack shape on the thorax.
So our next bee here, on some Agastache. Just give a couple seconds for you to have a guess. So this is indeed an Aphanus. I believe this is an Aphanus male, because we can see this is a nice picture where we can kind of see through the wings, even though they're covering. We can see that rusty patch really well, bordered by the yellow on the abdomen. Really nice look at the thumbtack shape here too, which you can see just comparing from the last Tenarius slide. Oops. Yeah, it's just a little bit more subtle with its band and coming down towards the abdomen. And the reason I say this is a male is because I think this yellow hair at the top here, it's got more yellow tufts on the top of the head, which is more typical of males than it is of workers. So yeah, this is a nice, pretty textbook Aphanus male.
All right, our next bee here on some milkweed, zoomed up close in. Really, milkweed has such interesting looking flowers when you zoom in close on them. So for this bee, this is not a rusty patch bumblebee. This is Bombus perplexus. So yeah, they have yellow hairs all across their thorax. So we're not seeing any dark hairs near the wing bases at all, or any kind of band through there that's making that umbrella. On T2, there's some kind of darker colored hairs here, but it can just be the angle of the camera. Really the thorax is really clearly this shaggy, all yellow, and not seeing what looks like a patch. Perplexus a lot of times will have these other colors show up, and further down the abdomen. I'm not going to say that never happens on Aphanus, but it's not as common.
Yeah. All right, so pretty chunky bee in this photo, on what I think looks almost like a crocus. So this would not be a rusty patch bumblebee. This bee, Huntii eye, is very similar to Tenarius, and it has the yellow, orange, yellow color pattern, which is enough for us to rule out rusty patch bumblebee in this photo. Also, just noting that on this bumblebee, the thorax band is just that, more of a band than it is of a thumbtack, because there's no black hair coming down. Also note how much yellow hair there is on the top of the head, which you probably wouldn't see on a rusty patch worker or queen. So yeah, not Aphanus.
Right, another example of pixelated in this case and slightly blurry photo, but showing us what we need to see. So I'll give you a second. Look at this bee. Make your guesses. So this one is not rusty patch, not an Aphanus. This is a brown belted bumblebee. We're not seeing the thumbtack shape. We do see those rusty hairs on the thorax, but they're bordered by black on the back edge instead of by yellow.
Okay, next bee, somebody caught, looks like in a vial, for a closer look here. So we'll give a couple seconds. So this is a rusty patch bumblebee, with a little bit more of a faded rusty patch, or just like lighter colored than some of the other photos we've seen, which might throw you off a little bit, but you can definitely see there is a distinct color difference between the bordering on the second tergite there and where the rusty patch is. Also, it's kind of like, it definitely looks like this bee is a little bit worn because that first tergite also is like missing some yellow hairs. But I think this thumbtack is like a really, really nice indicator. And sometimes even when like these hairs are faded, the thumbtack is sometimes the more reliable ID characteristic. Where I'd say this is like getting close to that point where like I'd rather rely on that thumbtack shape here than this rusty patch sometimes. So yeah, definitely an Aphanus. I think male, maybe a worker. I think it might be a worker.
I think it's a work.
Yeah,
That would be
I
my
think it is
guess.
too. I think it's a worker. Not enough yellow hair on the head for me. Okay, yeah, that's our last one.
All right. So yeah, hope that this was helpful, and getting an idea for some of the variability in the Aphanus that you'll see out there, things you might confuse with them. And just be sure to also take a look at the further information we have about queens to help with them.
Definitely.
And I think we have a photo set also that's just on Aphanus if you want to check that out.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone.
All right.